Hello, good day to one and all. This is Miss A. Krishna Sundar, Assistant Professor, Department of English, KAHM Unity Women's College, Manjeri. So today we are going to discuss the poem In Praise of Local Hundred, written by the Latino poet Martin Espeda. So this is Martin Espeda. He's a Latino poet. He was born in 1957 at Brooklyn, New York. He is a professor at the University of Massachusetts. His father was a part of the civil rights movement. He completed BA History from the University of Wisconsin. He was with the legal service for a number of years, and it was in the year 1982 that his political poems got released. Soon after, his poems became very popular. So some of the titles of his collections: The Immigrant, Ice Boys Bolero, Trumpets from the Islands of Eviction, Rebellion is the Circle of a Lover's Hands, and in the year 2001 he was named as Poet Laureate of Massachusetts. He was mostly recognized as a social critic because he stood for social justice. He mostly talked about, discussed the working class experiences. He has also tried to give voice to otherness, powerlessness, discrimination, and poverty. One of his greatest influences include his father, the ideal hero whose name is Frank Espeda. Espeda's poems contain subtle humor. He was also a very great fan of the Chilean poet Pablo Neruda. I'm sure you know Pablo Neruda. You might have studied a number of poems written by this poet. So coming to the poetry collection that we are discussing now, the title is Alabanza, New and Collected Poems. Now the poem under discussion, which is titled as In Praise of Local Hundred, is the very first poem in this collection, which means this is a poem which has in fact set the tone for the entire poetry collection. This collection won the Patterson Award. Now the term alabanza is a Spanish term which means praise. So this is how it comes in the title, In Praise of Local Hundred. Now the title poem became very popular. Now this is what Espeda says about writing poetry. To be a poet, Espeda asserts throughout this series of essays, is to be an advocate, to advocate for those who have been silenced and for places that are unspoken. Our work as poets can empower the silenced to speak. So before we get into the poem, a brief background study. Now this includes the attacks. I'm sure you might have recalled what it is by looking at the picture. So this is actually the September 11 terrorist attack. So this is how the World Trade Center was completely destroyed. Now this is actually the new Trade Center which was built later. Now this is known as One World Trade Center. Now here is again the Pentagon, which was also destroyed during this attack. So this poem is actually written within the background of the September 11 attack, which happened in America, where the World Trade Center was completely destroyed. So it was a series of coordinated attacks. A number of human lives were lost. There was a huge damage for infrastructure and property. Now this is considered even today as one of the deadliest attacks in human history. But this poem is not looking at the attack, or it is not speaking about anything else. Moreover, the poet here is completely focusing on the workers. And workers means the immigrant workers who worked here. Now moving on, I would like to show you a few pictures. Now this is Windows on the World. Now Windows on the World is in fact a restaurant. Now this is a restaurant which was inside the World Trade Center. So you can see the pictures. It's a very luxurious restaurant. It's very expensive kind of restaurant. You can see the whole of New York City if you occupy one of the seats within this restaurant. So this actually was on the 106th and 107th floor, and it was located at the North Tower because there were two towers, South Tower and North Tower. Both of them collapsed during the terrorist attack. Now there is a small restaurant attached to this which is named as Wild Blue. There is a bar, and the name of the bar is the greatest bar on earth. Now this opened in the year 1956 with an area of around 50,000 square feet, and at the time of attack, all the people, specifically the immigrant workers who were working in this restaurant, they got trapped inside. So some of them burned while some of them died because of smoke inhalation. Now some of them tried to jump off the building and they died during this process. So a number of distress calls actually came from the restaurant, but it was reported that there was a last kind of communication which came after a few minutes of the attack, but later there was no communication coming in, which means we have to assume that all the people died within the restaurant itself. So again, you can see some of the pictures here. So this is in fact a restaurant where many people met for many business deals and for many other packs. So this was normally a crowded place with around a number of workers working in the different phases of this restaurant. So the poet's focus here is not on the attack. So in a very political way, the poet is not touching anything upon the terrorist attack. He is definitely sympathizing with the people who lost their lives, but more than that, he is focusing on the lost lives of the immigrant workers. So there is a total of 5 stanzas. So the focus here is on the immigrant workers. So instead of mourning, it is a praise for these workers. Now there is a term, local 100. Now this local 100 means workers union or trade unions as you call in India. So there were 43 workers from this restaurant and all of them died during the attack because they were inside this restaurant, Windows on the World. Now there is a novel based on this, and the title itself is Windows on the World, which was published in the year 2005 by Frederick Beigbeder, who is a French novelist. Now there is one picture which I would like to show you. Now this is a picture where one man is jumping off the building. Now you can see him falling off. Now it is believed that this is one of the workers in windows of the restaurant. Now when this picture was released into the media, a lot of controversies came because this became a very sensational kind of picture where a man was flying into death. So it was very sure that he's going to die because he's jumping off from the 107th floor. So you can imagine. So this became very sensational, and even today it is considered as a sensational picture because people had different views about this. Okay, so this is a background. So now let's move on to the poem in praise of local 100. So this is a brief introduction that the poet gives as he begins with the poem. For the 43 members of hotel employees and restaurant employees, local 100, working at the windows on the World Restaurant, who lost their lives in the attack on the World Trade Center. So this is in fact a tribute given to these immigrant workers because nobody spoke about these immigrant workers after this attack happened. People were more bothered about the natives. Nobody spoke about these people who came from different locations, different countries to work in America. So this is how he begins. Alabanza. So he begins with a note of praise. Praise the cook with a shaven head and a tattoo on his shoulder that said "Oi." So praise the cook. So see, since this is about a restaurant, you can come across a number of terms in connection with that. So he begins by praising the cook. So maybe that could be the main cook, the main chef. So praise the cook with a shaven head. So we can get an image of this cook in our mind. His head is a shaven head and a tattoo on his shoulder that said oi. So there is a tattoo on the shoulder of this cook. Now you might have noticed most of the Western people, they have this tattoos placed on their bodies. So just like that, the cook was also having a tattoo on his shoulder which said oi. Now, if you look at the term oi, there is no specific meaning for this term. So this oi is something like addressing someone, hey. So it's just a form of addressing which can happen in any language, in any country, without any kind of regional or language differences. So this term oi has got a universal significance. So the poet is again and again trying to stress or emphasize the point that whether it be the native people or whether it be the immigrant workers, human nature is one and the same. Humanity is something which is required. So, the cook with the shaven head was having a tattoo which said oi. So, this oi is actually bringing a kind of universality for the entire number of human beings across the globe. A blue-eyed Puerto Rican with people from Fejado. So this is again the description of the cook. So the description continues, a blue-eyed Puerto Rican. So we understand that he is from Puerto Rico. So this is again a US territory. Puerto Rico is a US territory which is in the Caribbean island. So you can see the flag. Now this is actually a tourist spot with people from Fejado. Now, Fejado is a tourist spot which is actually in the Caribbean island. Many people visit these places every year. So, this man, the cook, is actually coming from this place, Puerto Rican. He's a Puerto Rican, he's coming from Fejado, so maybe his relatives, his family members, everyone else could be in Fejado. The harbor of pirates centuries ago. So before that, I just want to show you Fejado so you can see it's crystal clear, transparent water. So there is a lighthouse. So we'll come to those areas now. Okay, so he's a blue-eyed Puerto Rican with people from Fejado, the harbor of pirates centuries ago. So since this is a place where most of the traveling might happen through ships or boats, pirates. Now, who are pirates? Pirates are those people who rob these people in ships and boats. So, this Fejado was a harbor of pirates centuries ago. So, he is actually, the poet is describing Fejado because this cook is actually coming from that place. Praise the lighthouse in Fejado, candle glimmering. Glimmering means shining, white to worship the dark saint of the sea. Now, dark saint of the sea. Now, see, usually when you travel, specifically when you travel long distances in water or maybe in any method, traveling is risky on the other side. So here, when people used to travel through these islands, they used to light candles within the lighthouse in Fejado for a safe journey. So to worship the dark saint of the sea. So the dark saint of the sea here can be Saint Brenton because he is the patron saint of sea. Now I have already discussed this in the class because in Kerala context or in Malayali context we use the term like Kadalamma. So this is just like that. Saint Brenton is a patron saint. So he is the one who would rescue and save the lives of the people. So candles are lit to worship this saint. So this is actually a description regarding the place from where the cook is coming. So on the other hand, with a deeper level of meaning, the poet is trying to suggest the difficulties that these people endure when they come to a different country or a different place to do a job. So we have already discussed the difficulties how language becomes a problem when you get into another country, regional difference, cultural difference, difference in food, difference in culture, so lots of problems. So these people have overcome all these difficulties and problems, and they're staying in America to continue with their work. Okay, so we have seen these pictures. So continuing, Alabanza. So the next stanza again commences with the same praise term. Praise the cook's yellow pirate's cap, worn in the name of Roberto Clement. Now you can see a picture on the right hand side. This is what you call as a pirate's cap. So a pirate's cap is otherwise known as a tricorn because it would be having three corners. This is how a pirate's cap would be. So the cook is wearing the pirate's cap. So since this has got three different corner ends, you call that a tricorn too. So praise the cook's yellow pirate's cap, worn in the name of Roberto Clement. So here comes another name. Now Roberto Clement, you can see on the left hand side, he was a baseball player, but unfortunately he died in a plane crash when the plane landed into the plane crashed into the Atlantic Ocean. So the pirate's cap, worn in the name of Roberto Clement, his plane that flamed into the ocean loaded with cans for Nicaragua. Now there is a story behind this. Now Nicaragua was actually affected by a heavy earthquake, and lots of people lost their lives, and almost the entire infrastructure collapsed during this earthquake. So people were actually going through a lot of troubles. People were struck with poverty on one side. So Roberto Clement, he himself chartered a plane loaded with a number of eatables and many materials which were actually to help the people, the suffering people at Nicaragua, and he started his journey. But unfortunately, his plane crashed into the Atlantic Ocean and he died. So, this is a story that is mentioned here. So, he was actually taking food, huge amount of food for these people at Nicaragua, for all the mouths chewing the ash of earthquakes. So this is actually the terrible condition of the people with the after effects of earthquake. Alabanza. So the praising term comes here again. Praise the kitchen radio, dial clicked even before the dial on the oven. So praise the kitchen radio. Maybe when these people are working within the kitchen of the restaurant, the radio might be switched on. Dial clicked even before the dial on the oven. Now this dial clicked can have different interpretations. So maybe there is a sound which comes, a beep which comes once when the oven finishes its work. So the dial clicked even before the dial on the oven can actually mean before the oven stopped, maybe the attack happened. So it can be interpreted in that way too. So that music in Spanish rose before bread. So he's actually talking about the situation within the kitchen of the restaurant, music and Spanish. So maybe most of these people from these Latin American regions, they speak Spanish. So maybe the language and the music from the radio, they were merging together before bread. So see, there are three things which are getting blended: language, music and food. Praise the bread, alabanza. So an immigrant's life is always difficult. So see, he is bringing these names like Roberto Clement, again Nicaragua, the earthquake which came up, the difficulties of the people there. So he is actually taking us towards a different direction where we realize that these immigrants are actually coming from such difficult situations, places where there is an extensive level of poverty, places where there isn't enough food and water for survival. So praise the bread, alabanza. So he's praising these immigrant workers once again. Praise Manhattan from 107 flights up. So praise Manhattan. Now Manhattan is actually the metropolitan area in New York. it is considered as a financial hub, a cultural hub, maybe even a fashion hub. So you can see it is one of the most fashionable cities of the world. So you can see the ladies walking through the streets, you can see the crowded number of buildings here. So a lot of things are happening here. So this is actually the cultural and financial hub of America. So it is in this Manhattan that this restaurant is situated. So that is why he says praise Manhattan from 107 flights up. So here the praise is not actually indicated to Manhattan. Instead, praise it from 107 flights up, which means the 107th floor where the restaurant is located. Like Atlantis, glimpsed through the windows of an ancient aquarium. So, Atlantis is a fictional city which was mentioned for the very first time by Plato. So, let me take you to a few pictures. Now, this is known as the lost city of Atlantis. Now, we do not know how far this is true because the term Atlantis was used for the very first time by Plato, and Plato calls this as a dreamland. So it is something like utopia. You might have heard about Thomas More's Utopia, which is a dream city where there is equality, where there is love, brotherhood, etc. So a dream kind of city. So Plato calls even Atlantis as a dream city. So we do not know whether this really existed or not, and this was a well-planned city. Now this is drawings which were later done because a number of archaeological excavations suggest that this city existed once. But now automatically the question comes, what happened to the city? Now the archaeological excavations suggest that in a tsunami the city got completely drowned. So everything is so structured and beautiful in the city. So maybe you might have studied about Indus Valley civilization, where we studied regarding the cities like Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, etc. So everything looked very perfect. Now you can see certain pictures where excavations were actually done. So this is about the lost city of Atlantis. So like Atlantis glimpsed through the windows of an ancient aquarium. So just like you are viewing Atlantis through an ancient aquarium, you can see how the windows of this restaurant will give you a view to the outside world. Now, if you look at the picture, you can see the huge window panes. Now, if you look outside these windows, you can see the whole structures within New York City. So, this looks like a window to the outside world. Praise the great windows where immigrants from the kitchen could squint. Now, what is squinting? Now, you can see another picture on the right hand side where the child is squinting the eyes, which means when there is a heavy sunlight falling into your eyes, you squint your eyes. So, here, when you stand in front of these windows, even those people working within the kitchen, they can see almost the entire world. They could squint and almost see their world, hear the chant of nations. So, see, when these people are looking out of this window, what are they actually seeing? Is it Manhattan that they are seeing? Is it New York City that they are seeing? No. They are not seeing Manhattan through this window. They are not seeing New York through this window. What they see and what they hear would be something related to their own places, their own nations. Hear the chant of nations, and then here goes Ecuador, Mexico, Republica Dominicana, Haiti, Yemen, Ghana, Bangladesh. So the poet is trying to imply that a number of people from all these locations are working in this restaurant. So we all have that kind of a sentimental attachment towards our native place, our native locations. So here again, though these people are working within these restaurants, their mind is always looking for their own native places. So, the difficulty that you have to go through when you leave your place, your people, and move into a different location is what is suggested here. Alabanza praised the kitchen in the morning where the gas burnt blue on every stove. So, here The poet is talking about how busy the kitchen would be at early mornings, where the gas burnt blue on every stove. So all these workers would be busy working with these items within the kitchen. And exhaust fans fired their diminutive propellers. Now you can see the picture. Now exhaust fans, they have got these fans. The diminutive means very small. Propellers would be those things which rotate. Hands cracked eggs with quick thumbs. So it shows the expertise of the people working inside kitchens. Hands cracked eggs with quick thumbs. So very quickly they are cracking eggs and preparing dishes. Or sliced open cartons. Cartons can be huge boxes. So these are the common things that you can find within the kitchen of a restaurant. Or sliced open, cut open the boxes to build an altar of cans. So how easily they pick these things and place it one on top of the other. Alabanza. So praise them because it is the expertise that you can see within this poem. Praise the busboy's music. The chime offers dishes and silverware in the tub. So who's a busboy? Now a busboy in simple terms can be a cleaner. You can see the picture there. Someone who clears and cleans the table in a restaurant. So praise the busboy's music. So what is the music? When the dishes they slide with each other, when they collide with each other, and silverware in the tub, because they have a huge tub to which they would be collecting all these remaining plates and glasses. So the sounds which would be produced from that, so that is considered as a kitchen music. So in fact, the poet is trying to praise the struggles of these immigrant workers. Alabanza praised the dish dog. Now the dish dog again could be the very same cleaners, or it could be people who are washing things inside, or people who are cleaning the tables, anyone who would be doing all these dirty works. But these works still have got its own kind of reputation because every job has got its dignity. So still these people are doing all these things with a smile because they need money, they need job, because they need to send this money to their native places, to their family members, to their relatives. The dishwasher who worked that morning because another dishwasher could not stop coughing. So see, there is an exchange of duty that he is talking about because one dishwasher was having some kind of an ailment. He was coughing continuously that another dishwasher, maybe a friend of the earlier one, took up the duty. Now sometimes we do that, right? Now, in our cases with teachers, when we have an invigilation duty and sometimes you cannot take up a duty on a particular day, you entrust it with your friends in the department. We entrust it, or sometimes we exchange the duties. Sometimes I give my duty to another teacher in the department and instead I would be taking up their duty on that particular day. So we make these exchanges sometimes. I'm sure you might have also done that. Sometimes if you have to make a presentation, you make exchanges or you make arrangements with your friend so that the other one would be presenting initially and then you would be presenting. So we make all these adjustments. Now, these adjustments are possible only if there is a friendship existing between the members. So one dishwasher was not well, so another dishwasher has taken up his duty. All because he needed overtime to pile the sacks of rice and beans for a family floating away on some Caribbean island plagued by frogs. So maybe he took the duty because his friend was ill. Another possibility is that he might have asked the other person and took an extra duty so that he would get some extra money because he needed overtime. Why? To pile the sacks of rice and beans for a family floating away on some Caribbean island. So maybe he is doing some overtime work, extra work, to get some extra money so that he can transfer that money with loads of rice and beans, vegetables, and other food items for a family surviving on some Caribbean island plagued by frogs. Now, plagued by frogs here is an indication to a biblical allusion because it is said that the Pharaoh, you know who a Pharaoh is? Pharaoh is a monarch in Egypt. So the Pharaoh was punished by God with a plague. This is how the story goes in the book of Exodus. So, according to the story, the Pharaoh was not ready to free the slaves, and as a result, God punished the Pharaoh with different kinds of plagues. Now, one plague was the plague of frogs. So, there were different plagues, like there was a plague of blood, because instead of water, blood comes, instead of water, frogs come. Again, different kind of animals, insects. So, there were different kinds of plagues. So, here he is relating to the plague of frogs, plagued by frogs. So, this actually speaks about the pathetic situation of the relatives of these immigrant workers. So, maybe they are placed in some location where there is not enough food, where there isn't enough water. So, to survive itself, it is difficult. So maybe they are taking this extra time to send some extra money to their family. Alabanza. So he's praising them again. Praise the waitress. So now he's talking about a female who heard the radio in the kitchen and sang to herself about a man gone. So a lady listening to the songs from the radio kitchen is singing to herself about a man gone. Now, this can be interpreted in different ways. So, maybe she could be a widow. Sometimes she can be a divorced lady. Sometimes it could be a love failure. We do not know what it is, but she has gone through a difficult phase where she has lost a man. Now, this losing a man can be symbolical. Sometimes it can be literal. So, sometimes if it is a love affair, the man might have ditched her. We do not know what the story is. But still, we have to realize that all these immigrant workers are people having their own bundles of difficulties and problems. So again, he says Alabanza. So if you look at this stanza, you can see the immigrant workers are having problems. One of them is coughing, so there is ailment. Again, there is sending rice and beans for the family, so there is poverty on another side. Again, loss, a man gone. So this loss can be in different ways. So we have to realize that these different troubles, different difficulties that the immigrants go through, nobody is actually taking care of these things. So it looks very easy when we find people working in other countries, but it is not an easy life. And this is what the poet is trying to speak. After the thunder wilder than thunder, after the shudder deep in the glass of the great windows. Now see, this stanza is actually discussing the attack and the impact, the sudden impact of the attack. So early morning, if you remember the first attack, it was a coordinated kind of series of attacks. So the first attack actually happened at 8:46 early morning. And this was a shock for all the people because it was an unexpected kind of attack. After the thunder, wilder than thunder. So maybe the poet is talking about the heavy, intense noise which happened at the time of this attack. After the shudder deep in the glass of the great windows. So to shudder means the shivering of the glass of the great windows. Remember, you have seen the windows, the glass windows in the pictures of the slide. So there was a heavy shivering in the glass of this great window. Sometimes the glass might have been completely broken or shattered totally because of this heavy thud noise. After the radio stopped singing, like a tree full of terrified frogs. So the radio, remember the kitchen radio, the song, the lady singing along with that. So this suddenly stopped like a tree full of terrified frogs. So people even did not get enough time to escape from this place. After night burst the dam of day and flooded the kitchen. So what is the interpretation here? The night burst the dam of day. So it is early morning actually, but how is it becoming a night? It is turning into a night because of the heavy smoke after the attack. So the entire place was filled with dark smoke, and that is why the poet is comparing it with night. For a time, the stars glowed in darkness, like the lighthouse in Fejado. So he is bringing a comparison. The stars were still glowing. And see, it is all the more risky, or maybe it is doubly dangerous here because the stars were burning. It is a kitchen. So there is every possibility that things can become even worse when an attack happens. So the stars glowed in darkness, like the lighthouse in Fejado. So see the comparison. The stars were glowing here, but the stars which glowed were actually glowing towards death. So it is compared to the lighthouse in Fejado, maybe the memories of these immigrant workers, like a cook's soul. So a stove, a utensil, or an equipment in kitchen is considered as a cook's soul. Soul, I say, even if the dead cannot tell us about the bristles of God's beard. Now, bristles actually means very thick hair. So, bristles can be actually, if you look at a painting brush and all, you call that bristles. So, even if the dead cannot tell us about the bristles of God's beard, because God has no face. So, even after the death of these people cannot speak about God because God has no face. So they cannot actually describe God by telling that God has a beard, or maybe the beard appeared like this. So they cannot give a description. So maybe the bristles of God's beard can again refer to Jesus Christ. So maybe that's the God he is referring to, because God has no face. So here he is bringing another important point where he says God has no face. Because different communities, different religions, we all have got different idols to worship. We have different ideologies about religion. So if you look at it that way, we all worship and pray to the one and the same God. So humanity is actually the very same thing everywhere. So humanity or human emotions, they remain the same everywhere, and there is no difference with that. Soul, I say, to name the smoke beings flung in constellations across the night sky. So this is what the poet means by the term soul, to name the smoke beings. So maybe he is discussing the people inside the restaurant who died by inhaling this smoke. Some of them were burned to death, some others could not escape and they inhaled the smoke and died. So he is talking about these people within the restaurant to name the smoke beings flung in constellations across the night sky. So maybe constellations in the night sky could be how we sometimes relate it with stars, sky, heaven, etc. Across the night sky of the city and cities to come. So these people died. Now the story doesn't come to an end here, because the stories of these immigrant workers will continue, and that is what he is suggesting by this city and cities to come, which means these stories, these struggles, these difficulties, these trials and tribulations of these immigrant workers will continue, and it won't be changed all of a sudden, or it can't be changed in one go. Alabanza, I say, even if God has no face. So once again, he is trying to avoid the segregations, because segregations are always man-made, right? We have different levels of differences in our society. We have the major gender difference, man and woman. We have regional differences. We have differences in communities. We have differences in languages, right? We have differences in locations. We have differences in attitudes. We have differences in color, creed. So many things are there. It's an endless list. So the poet says that God has never spoken about any of these distinctions or any of these kind of segregations. It is one and the same. Human beings remain as one entity, or as one and the same kind of entity in front of God. And that is why he is saying God has no face. So this stanza is all about the attack and the impact of September 11 instance. So different images of loss can be seen here, but ultimately there is a question coming to God. So sometimes even people get shaken within the faith in which they are placed, because life is never fair, because life never goes accurately just like a mathematical equation, because we have those differences. Sometimes we dream about something and just the opposite things can happen. So life is never fair, and that's why sometimes we say, why is this happening to him, or why is this happening to her? Because they are such good-hearted people, so how can this happen to them? And sometimes you see very bad people flourishing on the other side. So we always have this question, is life really justified? So life is never fair, because that is how the game of life will go on. So there is a question to God, and there is also another statement which is stating that all gods are one and the same. So moving on to the last stanza, Alabanza. So this stanza again begins with the same term, praise. When the war began from Manhattan and Kabul, two constellations of smoke rose and drifted to each other. So remember, in the last stanza, the poet was slowly getting on towards death. So here in the poem again, he is stressing and emphasizing in the context of death. When the war began, the after effects of this war, this is what the poet is trying to speak. Now, after this terrorist attack, there was a lot of confusions happening within the context of America. Their army was placed in Afghanistan, so a lot of confusions and a lot of problems emerged, and many innocent people suffered. So there is a problem, that there is some kind of a connection mistake happening here, so it's just getting cut, so hope it is still clear. Okay, so two constellations of smoke rose and drifted to each other. So this is actually the context of war. So Manhattan and Kabul, so two different regions, two different cultures, two different religions. So everything is different when you talk about Manhattan and Kabul. So two constellations of smoke rose and drifted to each other. So on a literal sense, this is just the war, the fight between the two locations. But on a symbolic level, two constellations of smoke rose and drifted to each other, which means there is an amalgamation of so many things happening here when one country is waging a war against another country. So the smoke rose, mingling in icy air, and one said with an Afghan tongue, "Teach me to dance, we have no music here." So this is the imagination of the poet. The poet says, one member from the Afghan group suggested, "Teach me to dance, we have no music here." And the other said with a Spanish tongue. So the Spanish tongue would definitely be an immigrant worker. So this immigrant worker is giving a response by saying, "I will teach you, music is all we have." So see, there is a kind of a compromise happening here between this Afghani and between this Spaniard. So in one way, if you look at this last stanza, the poet is trying to convey the fact that any kind of compromise is possible. Any kind of differences can be forgotten. Any kind of distinctions can be erased if people want to make that kind of a change. So here, as the poem ends, we see how one person from Afghanistan and another person from Manhattan, they are joining hands, forgetting the differences. They are joining hands in the name of art, because there is no music here and there is no dance, and the other one is saying, "I will teach you." So this is in the context of this America-Afghanistan war. And the poet is trying to speak about the fact that how humanity can go beyond the borders of war. So all these differences are created by men. Even the term immigrant, we use the other term native people or aboriginals, and then we call immigrant workers, people who are not from the very same location. So all these differences have been created by human beings, and ultimately he says art unites human beings. And when he talks about art, he even considers poetry as a part of art, and that is why he firmly believes that poems can bring a change in society. So once again, he praises the difficulties and troubles of these immigrant workers, and the poem comes to an end. So thank you very much for your patient listening. If you've got any doubts or clarifications, do not hesitate to connect with me in my email ID. So once again, thank you everyone.